Last month, I replayed Dark Souls 3 for the first time since it came out. Up until now, it was one of the few FromSoft titles I had only beaten once, and it's a shame it took me so long to get back to it, as Dark Souls 3 is very good. I can't think of many better examples of a studio firing on all cylinders to create stellar levels, music, characters, and of course bosses that add up to be so much more than the sum of their parts. After finishing the base game and finally getting the chance to play the DLC, I couldn't help but be swept away by its brilliance. And in the joy and excitement of revisiting this masterpiece, I was struck by a terrible idea. I should get all of the achievements. For those of you who also made the mistake of 100%ing Dark Souls 3, this staircase will be irritatingly familiar to you. It is the most reliable way to collect the Covenant item for the Blades of the Dark Moon called Proof of Concord Kept. You can exchange 30 of them for a ring and miracle that is needed for 2 of the achievements. These 2 Silver Knights have a very low chance of dropping one. I've seen contrasting information across wikis and Reddit posts, but broadly speaking, based on the gear I was using, the drop rate for the item was somewhere between 3.5 and 4%. On a perfect run, I could do a loop in about 35 seconds, and on a not so perfect run, well, the time definitely could add up. Even when estimating at the higher end of the drop rate and a fairly generous run average of 45 seconds per loop, the pace would roughly be 1 Proof of Concord Kept every 12 runs, or about 9 minutes per proof. Extrapolating it out even further, and that's around 4.5 hours of grinding to get the necessary amount. There are 5 other covenants with items like this. In fairness, none of the other grinds are as bad as this one. Most have more efficient farming spots, and a couple can be done through summoning a friend, but regardless, all of it put together will take most people around 15 hours. When I started, I knew this would not be time well spent. I'd be doing the exact same motions over and over again, not in service of learning something new or getting more skill, but rather in service of RNG. I have no issue putting a ton of time into figuring out how to do something challenging, but this was not that. The challenge was purely in mustering the patience to kill the same 2 enemies hundreds of times. Throughout it all, I found myself constantly asking, why? Why am I doing something that isn't fun, that isn't rewarding, that isn't enriching? There are hundreds of games in my backlog I could be playing instead, all of which have the promise of being a way better use of my time. Like, man, Ultra Kill looks so rad, and I've been saying I should play Citizen Sleeper 2 for months now, and maybe it's finally time to give the Kingdom Come Deliverance series a shot, but then I didn't. I came back to the staircase anyway. I suppose I felt a sense of obligation to 100% the game. FromSoft has been my favorite developer for a good while now. I've gotten all of the achievements in Dark Souls 1 and 2, for Bloodborne, for Elden Ring and Night Rain. It seemed a shame to not complete the Dark Souls trilogy just because of some grinding. This is a weird impulse I get with certain titles. With those that really click with me in a specific way at just the right time, I feel this desire to honor them, like I owe them something for providing me with a monumental experience. There's something about having that 100% next to a game that feels like it accomplishes that. It shows that it was worth it to do everything. The thing is, it very rarely is worth it. I've talked about this idea in the past, but most games don't really have great achievements. So often, like this grind on the staircase, they call for you to engage with the game in a way that is fundamentally different from what makes the game good. The stuff that made me want to get all of the achievements in the first place. With Dark Souls 3 specifically, the desire to 100% it came after the high of defeating Midir and Slave Knight Gale, arguably the best fights in the entire game. Ironically though, fights that aren't tied to any achievement. Despite that, I knew what the achievements would entail. I knew it wouldn't just be the fun stuff, but once I made up my mind that I wanted to do it, it was hard to want to abandon that. And once I collected 1 Proof of Concord Kept and then a couple more, and then a couple more, it seemed like I should just stick with it. It was as if just by starting the grind, I had sullied my ability to have my playthrough end by experiencing one of the best bosses FromSoft has ever made for the first time. So if I couldn't end on peak, I might as well see this stupid something through to the end. I wish I wasn't this susceptible to sunk cost fallacy, but it happens more often than I'd like it to. I reach the point where I'm not having fun, and not in a good way that will eventually have a real experiential payoff, but I stick with it anyway. A very similar thing happened to me earlier this year with Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I adored the game so much that when I hit credits, I didn't want to leave the world behind. I wanted to stay in it and honor the game by experiencing everything I could. And luckily, or I guess unluckily for me, Clair Obscur has tons of optional content to engage with. Now, some of it is pretty incredible, but a lot of the optional stuff is just reskinned versions of older enemies. And as it is pretty easy to create incredibly powerful builds, most of it becomes trivial. Like, I didn't even use the Stenhall build that could one-shot bosses, but I was still beating most things I fought before they could even get a turn, and that includes the actual cool, unique bosses. What had mostly felt like a well-paced and decently balanced experience throughout the core of my playthrough turned into an exercise of just watching lights and colors for 15 hours as I collected every journal, gathered every record, and killed every boss. Without the gripping narrative to propel me forward or the challenging combat to keep me engaged, continuing to play it felt empty. Regardless, I kept with it long after I had grown tired of it. When I had rolled credits, I probably would have put it in my top 5 games of all time. When I got the last achievement though, I just thought it was really good. There is of course something to be said about loving a game so much that you end up overexposing yourself to it and enjoying it less. What better way to honor a game than be willing to experience the worst parts of it? This is a silly impulse. I imagine most developers would probably prefer players to not follow through on it, but it is an impulse I feel all the same. I hope that in 5 years or something, I forget about how I felt by the end of my time with Clair Obscur and only remember the best bits. It could be argued that remembering the experience of me kind of ruining the game for myself might help me avoid doing it again in the future, but I kind of doubt that's the case because only 3 months passed between me grinding the end game of Clair Obscur and me grinding this stupid staircase in Dark Souls 3, and the disappointment of that experience didn't deter me in the slightest. Now, this grind is not the intended way to gather the Proof of Concord kept. The way you're supposed to get them, as well as all the other Covenant items, is through PvP. I imagine getting these was more reliable at release when tons of people were still playing, but now it is pretty hit or miss. Not only is it exceedingly rare to get summoned as a Blade of the Darkmoon now, but in the off chance you do, it will almost certainly be into the world of longtime players that have crafted specific builds for PvP in these areas. Meaning, unless you are very into Dark Souls PvP, you probably will get stomped. These items being dropped by normal enemies is FromSoft's way of making the Covenant rewards attainable regardless of how active the player base is. It's a compromise. While attempting this grind, I had the Blade of the Darkmoon Covenant insignia on throughout and got pulled into an invasion a grand total of 3 times. There are a few things I could have done to make it a bit more likely to get summoned, but it never would have outpaced the farming approach. And honestly, based on looking back at old posts, even when the game was more active, it seems like getting summoned still would have been the slower choice. With all of this said, I do think it would have been a lot more fun to get all of the Proof of Concords kept through PvP. It would have pushed me to engage with a system that I haven't really put that much time into, to learn the meta, to hone my skills, to be truly challenged. The thing is, even if the PvP method was more reliable than it is, I have a feeling I probably still would have chosen to farm enemies instead of other players. With invasions, there is so much more out of my hands. It relied not just on my skill, but also on the skill of whoever I'm facing, as well as the number of players who are in the invasion, as these almost always are gank fights. Not to mention, it also relies on our connections to the internet, and while I'm sure I would get better at PvP through the experience, the uncertainty of a reward almost certainly would have been enough for me to just stick with the more reliable method. I wouldn't know how long it would take me to win enough fights to get the Covenant items, and even if I played pretty much perfectly, which I know I wouldn't, there still would be too many variables that could lead to failure. Yes, spending 9 minutes to get one item is annoying. It is less fun, but it is reliable. And when the focus is all about the result, that's what becomes most important. This sort of thing isn't just tied to 100% in a game. Frankly, it happens all the time on casual playthroughs. A while back, Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit put out a great video on how game designers protect players from themselves, and it centers around a quote from developer Soren Johnson where he says, "Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game." It's so easy to fall into the success mindset, to go with a strategy that gives you, or even just seems to give you, the best chance of winning. I constantly fall into this sort of trap. I find an approach that works and become reluctant to try anything else, because what if that doesn't work as well? And games do often make it easy to fall into this. Like when you have a limited amount of an upgrade material and you've already put a bunch of them into what you're using, you won't want to waste anything on something that might end up being worse than what you have. What if you need it for something else? The majority of the time though, this just means I don't end up using most of what I collect, but by the time I realize I could have afforded to test stuff out, I'm typically near the end of a game. I did this with Lies of P. I pretty much used the starting heavy blade the entire time, and it was fun. I really enjoyed that game, but I'd be willing to bet that it is not the most fun weapon to use, not by a long shot. But I was afraid to divert resources to something else that might make me less effective. I think this sort of success mindset also leads to me becoming too focused on the main objective of a game. Sure, I do like having fun, but it becomes really easy to get pulled towards the things that will bring about progress the quickest, to get the satisfaction of moving forward. Ironically, to be done with the game sooner by avoiding what arguably could be the most fun stuff in the game. This combination of sunk cost and me trying to optimize how I approach games sometimes leads to me getting a very small slice of what a title has to offer. In general, I'm pretty bad at finding the middle ground with this. My gaming habits either get me to underengage and miss out on things, or, like with Clair Obscur, overengage in ways that rely on less interesting gameplay, usually in service of efficiency, and inevitably grow tired of it. This is why I like short games that don't have much you can miss, as well as very open-ended titles where everything you do feels like it is in service of the main objective. I've talked about this many times before, and unfortunately for you, I will talk about it many times again, but it's why Breath of the Wild worked so well for me. While there certainly is a delineation between what could be considered main content and side content due to its structure, the lines are far more blurred, and everything you do builds towards the main goal of defeating Ganon in a tangible way. It made it hard for me to optimize the fun out of it in the way I want to do. This is also why I appreciated its controversial durability system. By having things break, I had to constantly be trying new weapons and approaching fights in new ways. The game didn't really let me fall into my old patterns. In Mark's video, he examines the importance of developers creating proper guardrails to help players play games in the most fun way possible, but there is a limit to what developers can do. They can't predict every player's behavior, and adding in too many guardrails may negatively impact the experience in other ways. With that said, at a point, as much as I hate to admit it, some responsibility has to fall onto the player to make sure they aren't ruining the game for themselves. This isn't always easy. It's hard to know the intent of every design decision and what actually is the best way to approach a game. How are you supposed to know if you are having the right amount of fun? Of course, these challenges don't absolve players from any guilt. Just because it is easy to fall into patterns that make a game less enjoyable does not mean people should let it happen. This is something I've been trying to come to terms with more and more. I've long recognized and publicly admitted that many of my issues with games are me problems, but I tend to discuss those issues by examining what certain games do or could do in order to appeal more to players like me. I far more rarely examine what I could do differently, how I can break out of my habits, leave my comfort zone, better engage with titles that don't match my design sensibilities. Obviously, I love games that are designed to appeal to the tastes of players like me, but if I only play those kinds of games, I know I will miss out on special experiences. But it can't just be about playing games that are outside of my wheelhouse. It also has to be about playing them in a way that is outside of my wheelhouse. Test every system and weapon, even if I'm not mechanically incentivized to. Engage with exploration and side quests, even if it doesn't amount to progression. Make my own fun with the tools I am given, even when, or especially when, there is no actual reason to other than it be fun. I want to get better at this. I'm trying to get better at this. It's hard to get better at this. It's so easy to just say play in the way that's the most fun, but sometimes fun takes intention, and sometimes I don't know what will be the most fun. But the only way to find out is by trying. To be clear, I do think it is very valid to criticize the ways in which games incentivize uninteresting play, but there is a balance, and I know I could do more. Now, in the case of 100%ing Dark Souls 3, like I said before, there wasn't that much more I could do. The intended way would have required me to sit around waiting to get pulled into an invasion, and while the gameplay itself would have been more fun, it would have taken so long to do and wasted far more time. Farming these 2 Silver Knights just made the most sense. I mentioned before that during this grind, I thought about all the other things I could have been doing, most notably the games I could be playing instead. However, I think if I truly had wanted to play something else, I would have. The choice to continue wasn't just that I was pot committed or that I felt like I owed Dark Souls 3 something, it was also that it suited the headspace I was in whenever I chose to play it. It is harder now to be bored than it ever has been before. There is just so much always, and all of it is fighting for our attention. Whether it be the call for consumption or the call for productivity or the antithetical convergence of the two, we are constantly pulled to fill our time with something, to never let our mind be unoccupied enough to feel boredom. Of course, boredom is important. It lets the mind wander, it spurs creativity, it restores mental energy. We aren't designed for constant mental stimulation. We need time to do things that are less taxing. We need time to do things that let our brains settle. I could say that I could have been playing any other game instead of doing this grind, but that's probably not true. In the moments I was most interested in getting a few more proofs of Concord kept, it wasn't when I wanted to engage with thoroughly complex systems or be distracted from my boredom with something incredibly fun. It was when I was a bit tired from finishing up some work and just wanted something to do with my hands. It wasn't replacing the role of playing a game. It was replacing doodling, or skipping rocks, or spinning a pencil. Doing something that took a bit of focus, but not all of it. Doing something that kept me a little entertained, but not very. And yes, I do recognize turning to video games to fill this role means I am cooked. I know there are healthier ways to be bored. I turn to those plenty too, but this does have its value, and is far better than the easy trap of endless scrolling I am prone to fall into when I give myself the chance. Despite it being me playing a video game at the end of the day, it wasn't a pacifying act, and as the actions became rote, my mind had more and more space to wander. It wandered to my thoughts on FromSoft games as a whole and why they work for me. It wandered to my gaming habits and what I look for now in games as opposed to years past. It wandered to every idea I've talked about in this video. And once I found myself reflecting on and being interested in the things that were driving me to continue this stupid grind, that became a new drive. I needed to finish it so I could share my experience of falling into this kind of trap, of creating Sisyphusian grinds for myself for the sake of honoring a game even when it comes at the expense of it. And Miyazaki will never even see this. It added a new layer of meaning, and meaning is what I needed. I needed a reason to justify using my limited gaming time on this. And in turn, I began connecting to the grind more and more. The sword-wielding Silver Knight dropped the first 4 proofs, so I deemed him the cool one. By the end, I think the split was pretty even between the two, but that favoritism never wavered. Fuck the Spear Knight. I noticed phantoms of other players wearing the symbol of avarice, clearly taking part in the same grind I was, and I felt bolstered in my desire to see it all through. Any temptation to use mods in order to get the number of proofs I needed evaporated. If they had to suffer through this to get the achievement, it would be a disservice to them to do it in any other way. I read posts online about other people doing the grind, and I felt a camaraderie with them over our shared stupidity. Eventually, I found the grind to be relaxing and fell into a weird sort of flow state. I accepted that it would take however long it takes and just appreciated when things did go my way. On one run, both knights dropped a proof of Concord kept. It felt as good as beating Gale. Not long after, I went 20 minutes without a single drop. I lived a Dark Souls 3 experience that only 5% of people who played the game have. It was a waste of time. I would never recommend anyone do it. But I did do it. I suffered through it for some reason. I went up and down these stairs time and time again, and it never seemed like a good idea, but I couldn't stop. The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Rasputin happy. Of course, I am not Sisyphus. This is not divine eternal punishment. It is me choosing to play a video game in an unfun way. Maybe it started by getting swept up by the gaming habits I unconsciously fall into, but as I've already pointed out in this video, it didn't take long for me to recognize this, yet I continued anyway. I found meaning in the repetition. I made it the kind of suffering you look back at fondly. I do want to be very clear that this is not me saying it was worth it, or that the fact I was able to find value in playing the game like this is inherently a good thing. It is simply to make clear that the reason I keep playing games I love in an unfun way, despite feeling like I am kind of ruining them, is due to the human instinct to dredge meaning from any experience, regardless of how much it sucks. It is, in fact, pure cope. Now, I do think that term gets used in a way that is far too dismissive. Most things in life do not go exactly our way, and it is in our ability to cope that allows us to not be miserable every waking minute. Being able to find enjoyment in wasted time and missteps is part of being human. Ultimately, while I do think it is a good thing that I am able to do this, I don't think it is necessarily always good when I do. There are plenty of instances where I think I would be better off disrupting the patterns I naturally fall into, and I hope this reflection of me clearly pointing out to myself and to you the ways in which I approach games in unfun ways, whether it be just on a normal playthrough or on a 100% playthrough, will get me to do that a bit more. Just because I can make meaning doesn't mean I should. And I think I need to get better at knowing when to back down. I have my doubts though. For instance, a tiny yet not insignificant part of me wants to 100% Dark Souls 3 again. It annoys me that I 100%ed Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and Bloodborne on PlayStation, and Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and Night Rain on PC. It'd be nice to have all of them done on one platform, and that's really only possible on PlayStation. Also, frankly, Elden Ring and Night Rain weren't all that hard to 100%, so the worst part about getting the platinums would really just be doing the Dark Souls 3 grind again. And look, it wasn't that bad, all things considered. Now, this would mean doing Sekiro 2, as I'd want to complete the set, and that'd be tough, as I've heard it has almost as bad of a grind as Dark Souls 3. And also, I'd want to do the original Demon Souls, which unfortunately calls for more grinding than all of the Dark Souls games combined. And then, I don't know, maybe I should do Scholar of the First Sin to get the full DS2 experience, and the Demon Souls remake, as I've heard they changed the trophies from the original, and Armored Core 6, as I might as well do it if I'm doing all the rest. I don't think I will do this. I really hope I don't do this. There is a non-zero chance that I will do this. What's more likely is I will get swept up again in the way I did with Dark Souls 3 or Clair Obscur or the dozens of others before it. I will become so focused with the result that I won't properly address the process until I've sunk too much time in it. It is who I've been and who I am and who I will be. And in fairness, it has worked out pretty well. I love games, and I love talking about games, and because of that, regardless of what an experience entails, I always will get something out of anything I play. The mere existence of this channel has acted as a way for me to add value to every game I try, and now that it is my job to talk about games, that is more true than ever. I'm in a unique position where a bad experience with a game can lead to me making something just as interesting, if not more interesting, than a good experience with a game. Frankly, this platform kind of incentivizes it. I try not to let that affect how I personally approach games. I don't go into something with a negative mindset hoping I can farm it for content, but I also don't always go into stuff with the intentionality that I probably should. I do like the sentiment of playing games in the way that is most fun to you, and maybe it is just that easy for many of you, but I at least have not found it to be that simple. It is hard to always be aware of the habits and patterns you subconsciously fall into when actually playing something, and even when you are, the way games are designed to bring about so many variables that can get in the way. With that said, while I don't know that I can just play games in the way that is the most fun, I would like to play them in a way that is more intentional, to not always get swept up in how I tend to approach them, which in one way or another always is about me focusing too much on the goal. Whether it comes in the form of mainlining content for progression's sake, or hyperfixating on completion criteria that is neither interesting or fun, I want to move away from it a bit, to be better at making sure I'm actually getting the most out of everything I play, to go against my instincts sometimes, and instead try to play games in the way someone else might, in order to see what my playstyle might be missing. It could be that this in itself is a bad idea, that it will lead to me having a terrible time in entirely new ways. But if this grind taught me anything, it is that I will find a way to make it matter nonetheless. Ugh. Oh my god. I still have to beat the game 2 more times. This is so stupid. Through all of this, I have been thinking a lot about all of the games I've 100%ed over the years. So I decided to put together a video where I go over every single one I've done and give them a rating based on how enjoyable or annoying they were to complete. It has been a while since I played many of them, and there honestly ended up being way more games than I would have guessed. I had a lot of fun reflecting on my gaming history, and I think you'll be surprised by some of them. I did also give out one 10 out of 10 for a game that I actually think is worth 100%ing, and you might too. If you'd like to watch the video to find out which one it is, even though you already know it's Outer Wilds, you can check it out right now on Nebula. I've been a part of Nebula for a good while now. You've almost certainly heard me talk about them before, and will again, because it is the best place online to watch videos from many of your favorite creators, like me, Game Maker's Toolkit, Jacob Geller, King K, and tons of others. You not only get the best versions of these creators' main videos, but you also get tons of bonus stuff exclusive to Nebula. I'd recommend checking out the video I mentioned already, as well as a conversation I had with Jacob, Iron Pineapple, and Eurothug 4000 about Clear Obscure Expedition 33 and all of our thoughts on it. We actually recorded that before I had started to 100% it, so it is an interesting little time capsule that shows the differences between how I felt right after rolling credits to how I feel now. Along with that, there are Nebula original shows like Abolish Everything, which is sort of a panel presentation show where guests make pitches for things they think should be abolished. It is a lot of fun. Nebula just has a wealth of things to watch and listen to, made by many of the most thoughtful people out there. For those interested in being more intentional with what they watch, I can't recommend a better place to go. So by going to nebula.tv/Rasputin or just clicking the link in the description, you can sign up for a year at just $3 a month. It is a killer deal and one of the best ways to help support what I do, as well as all the creators on the site. So sign up, check out my videos on all the games I've 100%ed, and then enjoy everything else Nebula has to offer. Anyway, thanks to Nebula for sponsoring this video. For all of you still here, hello. As always, I want to give a big thanks to my patrons for making this channel possible. I hope you all have a great day and or night, and I will see you in the next one.